All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is daily vlog number 18, and I needed a drink. Oh, man. So, today, I have been fixating a lot on the idea of class design in tabletop RPGs. And just, I mean, technically RPGs as a whole, but I feel that video games in general have kind of a leg up when it comes to class design because they have just so many more ways to make a class feel unique. Like if we look at well, here I'll give you guys a good example because I feel like class design in earlier versions of Dungeons and Dragons was not particularly good. I'm not saying it was bad or anything like that, but when I think of class design and the idea of kind of the fantasy of the class in earlier editions of Dungeons and Dragons, unless you go all the way back to like original D&D, and that has a whole different issue. A martial based class from levels like 1 to 3 or levels 1 to 4 plays almost identically to any other martial class. Like a paladin and a fighter and a ranger, they all basically play the same depending on what weapons you give them. Like a dual wielding fighter and a dual wielding ranger play exactly the same. And that's true about advanced first edition, second edition, both basic and advanced, and I guess not basic. We'll get back to basic in a second here. And then third and 3.5. They all have this same problem of low level characters. All of the marshals are almost identical, and all of the casters are almost identical. Because in earlier iterations of D&D, you had such a limited amount of spells, and cantrips cost spell slots. So if you were a magic user, once you used up your daily allotment of spells, which you could easily do in the first combat of a day, you used a sling or darts. And that's all you did. You just stood in the back and threw things for like 1 or 2 damage if you could actually hit the target. And that was all you did. And the low-level spells, for the most part, there wasn't a lot of difference. Obviously, clerics got healing spells, and that's what they used most of their spell slots for. Sorcerers, warlocks, wizards, they all basically got kind of the same stuff. They had some kind of spell that did damage, and every so often they would have a kind of buff spell. That was it. And for me, that is poor class design, because when I choose a class, especially in something like D&D, where multi-classing in and of itself is not something that you can do at first level unless we're doing 4th edition. So, and then if you do decide to multi-class, again, you don't get the kind of cool power fantasy of, oh, I'm a fighter wizard, or I'm a, thief cleric or something like that. You don't really get that power fantasy until both classes have reached anywhere between level 3 or 5. Otherwise, you just kind of feel this is the same. It's one of the reasons why I'm not particularly fond of low-level campaigns in almost any RPG, because, again, the things that make the class cool a lot of times don't start showing up, at least in older RPGs, don't start showing up until later levels because they are a little bit more powerful. Yeah, for me, that kind of ruins the low-level experience. I get that a lot of RPGs, and D&D is included in this, D&D 5th edition is included in this, but every version of D&D basically use level 1 and sometimes levels 2 and 3 as tutorial levels. What I mean by that is they intentionally do not give you the ability to use a lot of the aspects of D&D 5th edition to kind of force you into learning the basics first, which is not a bad thing, but that does mean that anyone that has played D&D before is when they roll up a level 1 character is going to feel incredibly bored and feel like their first session is kind of a waste of their time because they already know this stuff. 5th edition attempts to fix this issue with all classes feeling the same at low levels by having a thing that I call defining features. I don't know if they have an official term for it at Wizards of the Coast, but I have a buddy that actually is one of their official playtesters. And he's had quite a few communications with Wizards of the Coast. And way back when I was first designing the Dragon Knight class years ago, one of the advice he gave me was, well, in 5th edition, every class is designed to be unique right from first or second level. In order to do that, they have these things that I eventually call defining features. And the defining features are the unique things that make playing that class feel different. And it was actually something that was taken from 4th edition, because in 4th edition, you had role features that made you made you playing a different role felt very, very different. And then at level 1, every class had a defining feature. If you were a defender, you had a very special way that you could mark. So marking was your role feature, and then your class defining feature was the different ways that you can mark. If you're a controller, you got some unique controller style powers that would let you do that. And every single class had something unique that they could do that no other class could do. Some of them were passive effects, some of them were active effects, like the Avenger is a striker. The Avengers' defining feature was their vow of enmity. That was the thing that made them different from any other class, and it basically meant that they could kind of select a target, and if they were the only person next to that to target, then they got advantage on their attack rolls before advantage was a thing. So when we go back to earlier editions, that just didn't happen, and now we're starting to see a lot more of the newer RPGs where right at first level you're going to have something unique, like Fabula Ultima, because you are a combination of classes and the skills that you get from each one of the classes are intentionally designed to interact with each other. Really, every single character feels very unique right from the beginning. I had in my Fabula Ultima campaign, I had 2 different characters that both took the Arcanist class. And they both played extremely differently, even when they were both using their Arcanist abilities. And I thought that was really interesting. If we go back all the way to original D&D or the basic versions of D&D, they actually effectively got rid of, or not really got rid, there really wasn't an issue with all the marshals feeling the same and all the spellcasters feeling the same, because if you wanted to play a martial character, you were a fighting man. There wasn't a paladin, there wasn't all these other things until much, much later when we started getting into advanced Dungeons and Dragons. You wanted to play a martial character, you were a fighting man. If you wanted to play a sneaky character, you were a rogue. Or a thief, I think is what it was, but back then. Or it might have been, like real early, I think it was just a halfling. If you wanted to play a healing type character, you were a cleric. And if you wanted to cast spells in any way, shape, or form, you were a magic user. And so the reason they really didn't have that issue was they used an extremely simplistic version where depending on how you wanted to play your character, you would choose the class that allowed you to do that. There weren't multiple classes that could let you play a similar character. And so there really wasn't a need for that in original and basic. But as soon as we got to advanced and they started adding more martial classes that had different flavors, you started running into the issue that low-level D&D was boring. And to be perfectly honest, low-level original D&D was boring, but for a completely different reason. uh, original D&D and basic D&D, the reason low-level D&D was boring was you most likely were going to have your character die before they leveled up. Characters were expendable until like level 3 or 5, and you were basically trained, do not get attached to a character until at least a few levels have passed, because they're probably going to die. Wizard or magic users back then had a D4 hit die, and you didn't add your constitution to it. So if you rolled poorly on your hit die, you could have a wizard with 1 hit point. And going to 0 hit points meant you were dead. Not that you start making death saves or anything like that. You just died. So bad rolls could mean that your character was worthless. Same thing with attributes and stuff like that. Real old school was just 3d6. You roll them in order. Whatever you roll is what you get. So you theoretically could have a 3 in a stat. You could go, I want to make a fighting man, and you roll a 3 for your first roll, and your first roll is always strength. So now either you're not going to be a fighting man, or you're going to be the worst fighting man ever. So yeah, but again, I've been looking at class design and stuff like that, and trying to come up with kind of examples of what I consider good low-level class design, because there have been tons of, not really studies, but there have been tons of observations that have been done on D&D Beyond and Roll20 through surveys and things like that. We know how people play tabletop RPGs in general, and the one that we know the most about is D&D, because it is by far the most played RPG in the world. I made that whole video about how Call of Cthulhu is the second most popular RPG in the world. It is still the second most, and in the US it's not even close. It's played a lot over in Japan, but the population of Japan is significantly smaller than the population in the US. Population wise, I believe US is one of the largest countries in the world. I know India and China dwarf us by massive amounts, and I think Russia might as well. But yeah, U.S. is really, really big. It's a massive, massive market, and in general, our not cost of living, our lifestyle tends to be significantly better than probably about half the world. And so a large amount of people in the U.S. do have at least some disposable income. And that's essential for things like games and stuff like that. So anyway, so I've been trying to figure out RPGs that I felt really create good class design, is for lack of a better term, where right from low level, and what I was getting at before, my brain is shot right now, guys. We know how people play D&D, and in general, the vast majority of D&D games are played between the levels of 5 and about 10 to 12. That's where people play D&D. There's some people that get into tier 3 or tier 4, and obviously there are some people that play in tier 1. And for those of you that don't know the tier system in D&D, 1 to 4 is tier 1, 5 to 10 is tier 2, 11 to 16 is tier 3, 17 to 20 is tier 4. And that's actually based on how the game changes at those little levels. It's not just arbitrary numbers. Fifth level introduces third level spells and extra attack. It massively changes how the game plays. 11th level introduces, I believe it's 7th level spells is what you get there. And again, they massively change how the game goes. And a lot of the martial classes just start getting really powerful things, like paladins just get extra damage. Every time they attack, they just do an additional d8 of damage. So things like that. And then the reason 17 is tier 4, that's the first time you get 9th level spells. So that's why they separate them into those to the tiers, is because the game is vastly different in each tier. So we know that tier 2 by far is the most common place to play D&D, and it's not even close. Again, a lot of campaigns start at either level 3 or level 5. I'm actually joining a campaign right now where we're all starting at level 5, because tier 1 is for the most part, it is an introductory level of the D&D. You don't get access to all the aspects of D&D at low levels, especially levels 1 and 2. 3 is where they really start kind of taking the hands off and going, okay, now you have access to a lot of different things. And then 5th level is when they're like, okay, this is how D&D actually plays. Yeah, I've been trying to come up with various RPGs that I feel like you can play from level 1 all the way up to max level if you want to, and you always feel unique, and you always feel like your character is special. So obviously Fabula Ultima is one of them. D&D 4th edition took it almost to a fault. Every single class was very, 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 very different. And right from level 1, you felt special. 5th edition, I don't believe does it super well, but it does it better than every edition other than 4th. And then 13th Age, I think, does a really, really good job of making you feel very, very special right at level 1. I've still got one more Designing New Dragons to do for 13th Age to do that. And then looking at other things like the Essence 20 system in general, your first level characters can feel very, very unique. But there's also the issue that because of the customizability with the weapon and upgrade system, you can also create 2 very, very similar characters at level 1. So I don't think, I mean, the class design is decent at level 1, where each level 1 character does have something unique to its class. Or not class, what do they call them in their roles? Each role has its own kind of unique aspect to it. And the focus system kind of lays into that. But again, and I've only played, or ran really, I've only ran effectively low level Essence 20. I had a Power Rangers RPG that I ran not this past year but the year before, and I think they made it up to, I think they were level 3, or the last session that we had they were level 2, and then I told them, hey, if we ever play this again, level up to level 3 and start thinking about your Zords, because we hadn't gotten to Zords yet. So Essence 20 is probably better than most, but again, because it started as a D&D 5th edition supplement, and kind of modified from there, I think they kept some of the bad habits from D&D. Well, I know they kept some of the bad habits from D&D because their book is backwards, where they don't teach you how the system works until after they've gone through the entirety of character creation, and that is backwards. But thinking of other RPGs that just really kind of feel unique, the Cypher system, I think, does a relatively good job of, despite the fact that they only have 4 types, which is their version of classes, despite the fact that they have only 4 types, because of the combination of descriptor, type, and focus, as long as you don't have 2 players that are choosing the same focus or the same descriptor, you're going to have very, very different characters. And I guess the same is true about Open Legends. There's a reason why I chose those 2 for my Zelda RPG. But Open Legend is kind of the same way, where they don't have any classes, but by picking the right feats and putting skills in the right spots, and then having the right, I can't even remember what the terms are now, because it's been a year, I think. Yeah, it's been a year since I've played Open... Or no, I played one in the... let me look this up. Open Legend. There we go. Banes and Boons, that's what they're called. By using the specific Banes and Boons that makes your character feel special. Yeah, I think those do a really, really good job, where every single Cypher system game, 100% I'm going to start from level 1. Every sister... I'm going to try this again. Every single every single open legend game, I'm going to start from level 1. Most D&D 4th edition games, I'm going to start from level 1 because you still feel special. 13th Age, I'm going to start from level 1. Fabula Ultima, I'm going to start from level 5 because there is no level 1. You always start at level 5. But yeah, so I mean, it's been on my mind recently as I've been doing more designing new dragons and discovering new dragons, and making my own stuff with like the Blood Knight and the Dragon Knight, and customizing stuff for the games that I run. Especially since both of the campaigns, like the campaigns I'm running right now, I believe one of them is a tier 4 campaign because I just got to level 17, and the other one is a tier 2 campaign, but they're at level 10, so they will be hitting tier 3 as soon as they level up, which will be a little bit of time. They just hit level 10 a little while ago, so I'm going to let them kind of live in level 10 for a little bit and live in the world of tier 2 for a little bit longer before the real crazy stuff starts happening. But yeah, I've just kind of been fixating on this idea of classes should feel unique right from level 1. Even if you do have multi-classing and stuff like that available from level 1, if you want people to play the entirety of your game, then you need to ensure that at first level things feel special. And I think there's a lot of RPGs out there that they simply don't do that. For all of its faults, I think Pathfinder 2nd Edition probably does that better than most D20 games. It's still massively overly confusing, but they do put a lot of emphasis in ensuring that each class feels kind of unique right from first level. They still force you to jump through massive amounts of hoops to be able to do the things that you want. But yeah, I think it's effectively a step in the right direction for that style of game. And again, each new RPG that I see has this emphasis on making sure that low-level play is just as exciting as mid-level play. Whereas the kind of old design structure was low-level play is for new players, and mid-level play is where everybody else plays, and then high-level is just for the freaks that stay long enough to do that. And I don't think that's a particularly good way to create an RPG. Despite the fact that, again, that's how it has worked for, 50 years now? We're coming into the 50th year, I think, of Dungeons & Dragons, and they started it. Yeah, so just food for thought about class design and stuff like that. Since I know a lot of my audience, I think the vast majority of my audience is very into RPGs in general. I'd like to hear from you guys, actually. Do you know of an RPG system where right at level 1 you can have two classes that are very similar but feel very different when you're playing? And I'm not talking about well, this one can make an attack with a longsword, but this one can only attack with a hammer. I'm talking about when you're at the table, you feel different when you're playing your character. It's not like, well, I am a fighter, and so I am very strong, and my bonus to attack rolls is +7. Are you still doing the exact same thing as the paladin, where you walk up to the person, roll a die to see if you hit, and then a roll a die to see how much damage you do? Then that's not special. There needs to be something, some mechanical aspect, or some flavor aspect that means that when your turn comes up, if you and this other person have the same goal of we're going to attack this creature, you both get to do something different in order to perform that. I'd like to know, because again, I've read tons of RPGs, but the more I read, the more I see a very, very common trope of low-level RPG is tutorial mode. Which again, I understand that's extremely useful for teaching new players. However, there are better ways to teach new players than handicapping your entire game to force people to not allow people to have more options than they really can handle when they're first starting. So yeah, I'm interested to hear from you guys. What RPGs do you feel do class design, low level class design right? And by that I mean they make every single class feel very different right from level 1. Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, this is all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.